I think in the very near future, I understand that Minister Alexander and officials at the Department of Immigration have been working on a plan for accelerating our commitments to welcome an additional 20,000 Iraqi and Syrian refugees to Canada. I know yesterday some 30 Syrian refugees arrived at the Toronto airport. I meet these people all across Canada all the time. Of course, today we've received 25,000 Iraqi and Syrian refugees. I would underscore, by the way, that there's been a tendency in media commentary not to report on the Iraqi refugees as though that's a separate issue. This is one big Middle Eastern refugee crisis. The two are totally interconnected. And the 23,000 Iraqi refugees we settled in Canada almost all came from Syria. They fled Iraq to Syria. They were affected by the civil war in Syria. We already had obligations to them prior to the full frenzy of the Syrian civil war. So we see these two populations as totally intermingled. Many from both countries have gone to Turkey, where we've also increased our resettlement targets. Anyway, you can stay tuned for the near future, I believe, for details on a plan for accelerating that additional 20,000 commitment with, of course, appropriate security screening. On the second question, it's no secret that during the campaign I'm blessed with very strong support in my constituency. I think I got 77% of the last election, and my constituents are very happy to have me traveling across the country, helping with the national campaign, because they want a majority Conservative government. So perhaps that's why I pitch in a lot. I'm sort of someone who's able to get around and address a lot of different issues. Well, first of all, we think the idea of airlifting people out of camps demonstrates a lack of understanding of the complexity of the situation. Very typically, the most vulnerable minority communities do not go to the camps. The camps are almost overwhelmingly from one particular community that's on one side of the Syrian civil war. Minority communities who are often targeted by groups like ISIL and al-Nusra don't go to those camps because they would be vulnerable minorities. They tend to go elsewhere. They get often lost in this debate and in the mix. We want to focus on those individuals who are very often not in camps. They find themselves in urban slums or living with extended relatives in places like Beirut, Amman, and Ankara. With respect to so this idea of airlifting people, look, this is not Vietnam. First of all, the Indo-Chinese boat people went to UN processing centers, and they typically stayed there for 6 or 12 months while their cases were being reviewed and screened before being referred to other countries. So it's not as though that process happened instantaneously. But that's not even a relevant analogy, because there were no players in the Vietnamese marine migration of 1979 to 1982 who were connected to terrorist organizations that have declared hostility to Canada. I've been to the camps in the Middle East. I've been to the refugee camps, and I've met people who've told me that they have relatives fighting against Bashar, fighting, quotes, jihad against Bashar in the Syrian civil war. I do not mean to suggest for a moment that all or most of the people in the camps are connected to terrorist organizations or constitute a security risk. But it is plainly evident that some do. It's plainly evident that some are connected to individuals who are involved in the civil war on the part of terrorist organizations, including those that pose a security threat to Canada. And it would be imprudent in the extreme for us to pretend otherwise, as Mr. Mulcair and Mr. Trudeau appear to be doing. Now, you ask a very good question about the nature of security screening, because I don't know where CBSA officials go to get a membership list of the al-Nusra Front or of ISIL. I don't know how they can identify, on the basis of a cursory interview, whether or not somebody actually has a relative involved in a banned terrorist organization. And that is why great prudence has to be taken here. And let's remember, there are not just 4 million Syrian refugees, there are 15 million Iraqis and Syrians who are either refugees or internally displaced. Given that we can't even settle realistically a fraction of those people, we say let's focus on the most vulnerable. In the first tranche of 1,300 that I committed to in 2000 in May of 2013, I believe, we focused specifically on women who were the victims of sexual assault, on gays and lesbians, and other people facing very unique levels of risk because they can't go to the camps.
Right. So just to clarify.
And I think there's a presumption could be made there that a woman who's been a victim of sexual assault is not going to pose a security threat to Canada. A military-age young man who may or may not have been involved in the conflict requires a greater degree of a risk assessment. So these are the kinds of things that we would have to do with great care. But my point is, in part by focusing on those who are the victims of al-Nusra and ISIL, we're less likely to end up admitting people to Canada who could constitute a security threat.
Right, and that was my question. I was just hoping you could sort of clarify that, because you used the word engaging prudence to go through the screening. So what are you doing?
Well, for every person that comes for refugee resettlement goes through the normal security screening with fingerprints, digital photos. They're checked against security watch lists and et cetera. But like as I say, given the vastness of this crisis and the number of people, that cannot be sufficient. And that is why, in part by focusing on the most vulnerable, such as those who are the victims of al-Nusra and ISIL and other terrorist organizations, that is a precautionary step as well. Because people who are victims of terrorism are, by definition, not supporting it. Oh, can I just? I'm sorry. I have to make one last point. I'm sorry because some people distort some of not you, but some people, certainly not you, have distorted some of what we said about this. Look, there's an article on CBC Online suggesting that when we speak about the particularly vulnerable populations in the Middle East, that this is code for excluding Muslims, and that is not true. Just 2 days ago in Edmonton, I met a number of the resettled refugees from Syria and Iraq we've brought, who are both Muslim and Christian, and we have specifically said that in seeking to prioritize the vulnerable communities, this includes, for example, the Ismaili Shia Muslim, who are the victims of groups like al-Nusra and ISIL. It includes the Druze. It includes Kurds, who often cannot go to those camps, and they typically are Sunni Muslims, and other minority sects. So this is not about a particular faith group. This is about those in a very complex, multidimensional civil war, those who are at the wrong end of organizations like ISIL and al-Nusra. Go ahead. Hillier. Well, we have admitted 25,000 Iraqi and Syrian refugees, and we've committed to an additional 20,000. So that gets us close to 50,000. I mean, people are picking numbers out of a hat. At the end of the day, we have to have a manageable number so that we can apply the appropriate screening and focus on the most vulnerable. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many we take. There will still be over 14 million, close to 15 million IDPs and refugees in the region. So that is why I think the overwhelming focus on resettlement is missing the target here. We need to stop the hostility in the region. Now, there's nothing that Canada can do to stop the Syrian civil war, but there is something we can do to degrade another cause of the violence, which is ISIL, and that's what our military campaign is about. And of course, we have to provide humanitarian relief to the IDPs and refugees, which is reflected in our announcement to contribute an additional $100 million on top of the $800 million that we've contributed to multilateral agencies for food, shelter, clothing, medical care, and education of refugees. I've been there in these camps, and I've seen the difference that we are making. I believe we are the 5th largest donor to refugee and IDP support for Syrians and Iraqis. So, yes, resettlement is important for a relatively small number of people, but it cannot address the scope of the disaster.
Minister, we're going to go Bill Griffin, CP. Sorry.
Absolutely to the contrary. First of all, I've met, if you just follow my Twitter feed, you'll see that long before the campaign and during the campaign. I meet every week with refugees that we've brought from Syria and Iraq, because personally I feel a certain attachment to them and their cause since I opened up this resettlement program in 2009 in Damascus. And I love these folks, and I just regard them as wonderful new Canadians. And I just met with several Syrian refugee families in Edmonton 2 days ago who did nothing but express their profound gratitude to Canada. But you know what the most common comment I get from the refugees that we brought here from the Middle East? It's the following: please do not allow the cancer of violent extremism that is consuming our countries of origin to follow us here to Canada. Please keep us safe. Please do not permit in this country people who are tearing apart our home society. So I actually have found in my 10 years, in my 5 years as Minister of Immigration, and my 10 years as Minister of Multiculturalism, that the strongest constituency for the integrity of our borders and a immigration system with security are new Canadians, especially those that come from countries with this kind of conflict.